I think on a sort of ideological, political, moral level, if you believe that Puerto Rico is a nation, is a distinct nation, which I think many of us do, um, then Puerto Rico is an occupied nation, right? It's not just like that there's a bunch of Americans who are living on an island somewhere. It's that Puerto Rico is a distinct and unique nation filled with a people who have, a distinct culture and national identity. Um, and what that means is that what the U.S. did in 1898, was invade a nation and has kept a nation as a colony for the last 127 years. And I would hope that most people agree that just as if the United States invaded a nation tomorrow, they shouldn't just get to add it as a state and go on like a annexation spree. If you invade a place, you should free it, not keep it. Um, so to me, that's at the political and moral center of the argument against statehood. Um, part of Puerto Rico being a nation is having its own, as I said, identity and culture. And I think many of us are concerned about what would happen to Puerto Rico's identity under statehood. Um, you know, as Bad Bunny has been singing about lo que le pasó a Hawaii, right? What happened to Hawaii? I think we've seen what happens to the native population and native culture of a place when it becomes a state. You have the Hawaiian language having to get rescued from the brink of extinction, basically. You have Hawaiian culture becoming a commodity for tourists in a way more than a meaningful expression of the culture of the people who live there. So would Spanish continue to be the language of government and education and public life in Puerto Rico if it became a state? Some people think so, but I look around the 50 states and I don't see any example of any place where any language other than English is, the main language used in society. So I think there's every reason to believe that a similar thing would happen to Puerto Rico. So there's that cultural piece of the argument. There's an economic piece as well, which a lot of people think, oh, this is really where the statehood argument shines. It's economics. Puerto Rico's going to get all this, extra federal money. It's going to get a little, or it would get a little, if statehood were possible, and we'll get to that. Um, but Puerto Rico already gets a ton of federal money, and it has not been enough to lift Puerto Ricans out of poverty. So, statehood would close some of those gaps. It would add, a few billion here and there, but it's not like it would double or triple the amount of money that Puerto Rico gets. And what statehood would also do is that to all those high local taxes that already exist in Puerto Rico, now add full federal income tax.
Right.
What does that do to the Puerto Rican middle class, which barely exists anyway, when you have even higher taxation? What does that do to corporations, to companies, manufacturers, for example, that right now are operating in Puerto Rico because they don't pay federal income tax in Puerto Rico? So there was an analysis done by an economist that suggests that if even 10 to 20% of manufacturers left after statehood because suddenly they have this to foot this huge tax bill too, the Puerto Rican economy would collapse. So these are the pieces of statehood of, what's the impact of federal taxation going to be, um, that people don't talk about. They think it's all a benefit. They think it's all getting more money, but there's this other piece of what would happen economically under statehood too. And then finally, or maybe not finally, because I think there's 100 other arguments, but the other big one for me, and the one I think it's really important to think about in this moment is, as I said, it's been 127 years of this colonial status. The United States could have made Puerto Rico a state at any point in those 127 years. It has chosen not to do that. And I think it's actually, believe it or not, farther away now than it's ever been. Um, any change to Puerto Rico status, including statehood, of course, would take an act of Congress. That means you need to get 60 votes in the Senate for Puerto Rican statehood, which, you know, depending on how the math in the Senate is at any given point, means getting, 8, 10, 12 Republican senators to vote for Puerto Rico statehood. Look around US politics right now and tell me when you think 10 Republican senators are going to vote for giving, 3 million Latinos the power to vote for president, for sending billions of dollars more to some poor brown people in the Caribbean, for letting those poor brown people elect members to Congress that rightly or wrongly, they're convinced are going to be Democrats and alter the balance of power in Congress, nearly permanently. Um, in what universe does that happen? It can't. And that's why no single status bill, no legislation to change Puerto Rico's status has ever, passed in Congress in the last like 50, 60 years, because Congress will not even consider the possibility that it could be forced to grant statehood to Puerto Rico if Puerto Ricans vote for it. They're just simply not willing to do it. Mostly the Republicans, but a lot of Democrats don't really care about it either.
Right.
And so the other argument against statehood is that it is politically impossible in the United States, and every second that we spend pretending that it could happen is another second that Puerto Rico stays stuck with this colonial, harmful colonial status. Yeah, for sure.